today, as Suman was suggesting, we're going to start with the first masterclass, and it's going to be on the topic of exponential mindset. So we're going to ask you during these 10 weeks to change your perspective, to change the way you see things, to change the way you see the challenges, the opportunities, the problems, the solutions. We're going to ask you to massively change your mindset, okay? And it's going to be it's a lot to request. But we're going to try to help you on during these 10 weeks through the assignments and through our coaching and through the interaction with ourselves to try to help you through this process. So first, before I start with the content, I wanted to introduce myself. I am originally an architect, which is something that surprises some people. But I did study architecture, and I've always been passionate about the change that you can bring, the positive change that you can create with technology. So I started applying that at an urban level with some urban design, some buildings, even some artistic installations. But then soon enough, I started to realize that the change that I could bring about with architecture was to some extent limited in comparison to the change that I could bring leveraging other technologies and with startups. So I started creating startups, and I was lucky enough to win an international competition that took me to Singularity University. And there I started seeing some of what I'm going to share with you today, a completely different mindset, a completely different understanding of what could be done, right? So in that context, I also was exposed to the original version of the book that originated the movement, the Exponential Organizations. And since I took part of the group that was originated to try to decipher the learnings from that book and try to start applying it in different organizations and so on. That was the beginning of the movement of the exponential organizations. And I was part of that original 100 group. And I was also part of the foundational sprint that we did with Interprotección in Mexico. And since I've participated in over I would say in some role or another in more than 35 sprints as an active coach or EXO head coach or advisor. And if you add them up, well, the number is really surprising even to me. It's something that I've really enjoyed because you get to work with people, companies internationally with bold ambitions and with very prepared professionals that really are in the process of trying to make a dent, to make a change on their organizations and on society. So that's why systematically I repeat, I am part of this ecosystem, a growing ecosystem in numbers, over 8,000 people at this point. And that's why I systematically accept participating on these sprints, because it is an amazing experience that I really enjoy. And I definitely hope that you'll be enjoying too. But I want to start with the obvious question. What is it that you're going to get with these out of this sprint? Well, one thing that all of the sprints have in common is the great initiatives. You're going to be working on amazing initiatives, and that is a common denominator through all of the sprints. Here on the slides, you'll see on the picture, you'll see some of the sprints that I have personally participated on. And you'll see that after this process that is represented here on the screen, that after these weeks, by July, you'll probably have 2 great initiatives per team. We'll be doing many more to begin with, and we'll be filtering them out and funneling them to have at least 2 or 3 great initiatives per team. You'll see that the ambition of this initiative is something that you will enjoy. Some of them will be related to the core of the organization. Some of them will be at the edge of what you're currently doing, but you'll enjoy because you'll be stepping out of your routines and thinking in completely different terms about what can be done, about the technology that we could be leveraged, and about a completely different kind of impact and outcome. So that should be quite refreshing. These initiatives are going to be demanding. They're going to be very interested, and some of them will become probably the core of your future organization. So that is always an incentive. These initiatives, see, we have a very interesting metric, which is the fact that 70% of these initiatives are invested upon. So that means success in general. That means continuity. So that is something also that participants tend to enjoy. And for us coaches, it's always a pleasure to see that on the news, that the sprints and the initiatives that we participated or helped the teams create through the sprints internationally, they make it to the news. So that is always a very satisfactory part of our work. But as interesting and as these initiatives might be, and I'm passionate about the ideas, about the, I actually created a creative lab for innovation. So I'm really motivated about the initiatives themselves. But I came up to understand over time that the sprint has a higher value, and that is on the learning side. The initiatives become vehicles for your transformation and for our learning. So we'll be learning about new skills, we'll be learning new knowledge, and hopefully we'll be learning something much more important, which is how to change the way we think, a new mindset. Let me start with the skills. During this sprint, we're going to learn new tools. Some of them might already be known to you. We're going to learn about tools specific to the EXO framework, which are, for example, the EXO Canvas, the exponential quotient, the EXO attributes. We're going to learn methodologies like design thinking, experimentation, and overall, we're going to try to understand converging trends, technologies, and new realities. It is all very important to understand this because we're going to make a step further in our understanding, in our application of critical thinking to problem solving, to analytic thinking. And that will also allow us to understand the potential impacts, the changes, and the opportunities that we might have ahead of us. So new skills will be on the table, but also new learning, new knowledge. After a couple of weeks, after week 2, typically you'll be consulting different sources like TechCrunch or Wired or Singularity Hub, and you'll be using new vocabulary like the exponentiality or abundance, etc. You'll also learn, and you have already started learning about exponential technologies. Of course, technology is of paramount importance, and it's very important to really grasp the pace of change and to have imagination enough to understand the potential impact that these technologies might have on our reality, on our future. We will need to come up to an image, a shared image of what the future might bring, because it is that image, alignment around those images, which will allow us to start building, to in the present, start taking steps towards that reality. So exponential technologies are those technologies that are changing at an exponential pace. And see, I was putting together the slides and I was seeing these technologies that were promising some 2-3 years ago, like 3D printing or blockchain or agricultural tech or drones or Internet of Things. See, all of these technologies are changing really, really fast. But of course, these technologies are no longer updated, because if we go back to 2020, we see a completely different battery of new technologies, exponential technologies that might individually have the same impact that the printing press had. So we are talking about Gutenberg moments. We are talking about a battery of 13, 15, 20 Gutenberg moments that are actually converging. If we see the plot of the exponential technologies through time, and this is of course oversimplification, but we will see that towards our century, there is a convergence, there is a multiplication of these appearing technologies. They're all converging and they are still growing at an exponential pace. It is very, very hard to make sense of this. We have, fortunately, these framework, these law by Gordon Moore that try to understand and convey how all of these technologies are changing and how they are following a doubling pattern. This is a representation that Gordon Moore did by 1970 something, in which he explained how the number of transistors in an integrated circuit chip was doubling every 18 months. So this is yet another representation of that. The price performance is following doubling pattern, and that not only affects the number of transistors, but we see that in pretty much every field that is digitized. We see that related to computing power, to digital cameras, to Internet of Things sensors, to brain imaging, to drones, to genome reading. The price performance is doubling every 18 months, every 12 months. So that, it's probably easy to say, but it's very, very, and it's easy to plot too. Here we have a plot of one of those doubling patterns. In this case, we have the price of lighting, pounds per a million lumen hours. But it's really very, very difficult to understand, to make sense of what this exponential pace of change means. Because our brains are not wired for that pace of change. We are wired for linear change. We're wired to understand in the horizon if a predator is coming after us and running. But we are not wired to understand this doubling pattern, this exponentiality. See, in 8 years, if we continue, if we apply these Gordon-Moore law and the law of accelerated returns to these fields that we've mentioned, we'll see that 8 years from now, the computing power will be 20 times better, 21 times better than it is today. And the drones, 665 times better. And the genome reading, well, it's just incomprehensible. So we have a law here, we have a framework that goes beyond our understanding. And it is proposing, when we try to understand where technology will be, where it will lead us some years from now, some 8 years from now, see, we can no longer apply the intuitive thinking, because our intuition is going to be limited. We need to do the we need to do an intentional thinking on the application of a completely different framework, a completely different mental model. And only there will we be able to understand the impact that these technologies might have. See, if we're starting today a project, probably we'll be trying to create a project description that incorporates the technology that we have today. But of course, if we follow the recommendations by Gordon Moore, we will be completely updated in 3 years from now, in 4 years from now, because the technology will be a completely different point. Let me provoke you with an example. See, Miami real estate is currently worth over $250 billion today. If the real estate value fell that much in 8 years, you could buy all homes in Miami for a total of $37,000. See, that is, we can repeat this, the magic, the logic is correct, the mathematics are correct, but it's just incomprehensible for our minds. It's just, it's unreal, right? If we go to another example, I'm going to talk to you about the drones again. So if we take out the drones, and I am, as an architect, I'm very interested about drones, because drones are acting like opening the space, opening the third space, which is the aerial space to the city, right? If we take, for example, the drone, an industrial drone back in 2018 could load more or less 150 kilos. And today, they are able to load more or less 220 kilos. They double the load capacity every 2 years, approximately. That means that in the next 3 years, they'll be able to lift a ton. So yeah, I was saying in 3 years, they'll probably be able to lift a ton. 4 drones will be able to load, for example, an empty container. And in 5 more years, in 8 years, if the trend continues, they'll be able to load containers of more than 16 tons. That is the weight that some cranes of the maritime industrial port carry today. So I'm suggesting in 5 iterations, in 10 years, maybe, there'll be no cranes or no industrial port like this anymore. Why? Because we will not need them. We'll be able to carry, to lift the containers from the ship to the train. So we'll be still making multi-million-dollar investments in cranes and in industrial ports, when maybe some years from now, a drone will be able to carry the container from the ship to the truck or the train. So we talk about ports here, and it is unforeseeable, right? It's so hard to imagine these as a reality. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it's a possibility that if we were about to make a multi-billion-dollar investment in ports, we should at least consider, right? The same applies to the airport. What is the business model of the airport? Well, the business model of the airport is the inefficiency, right? The weight. But now we have technologies that allow us to go through the security systems and the identification systems. So the inefficiency of the weight is no longer present, is no longer a need. So that means that probably in the near future, we can just segue through the airport to our planes. But maybe we won't even need an airport, because we can have a drones taking off silently, vertically from the top of a roof in the city. So maybe that whole typology that everybody takes for granted today, which is the airport, will no longer be in the near future. See, again, it's very complicated to let your intuition drive you into those scenarios, because they're not intuitive. They are the result of an intentional application of this exponentiality rule, right? See, this is what happens in our context, that we see a lot of rules, a lot of frameworks that are not intuitive and that we still need to apply in order to challenge our current thinking. that is the beauty of the sprint, and that is what we want to share with you, because otherwise we're going to fall in what we call the deception mistake. Every technology follows this exponential path in which, well, you don't foresee where the technology might be. For example, today, we know that the self-driving car is almost there, is yet not there, just like the virtual reality. It's in the deceptive phase, probably for many of us, but it will be there. The question is when. And the question is, will we be ready when this happens? See, Elon Musk suggests that we need to start investing now on the deceptive phase of technology, because otherwise what will happen to us is that we will be late. We will be hit on the face by the exponential technologies. And as important as these exponential technologies are, they're not the place to start probably, because technology is changing everything, but the exponential change that we are seeing, we're not going to make sense of it paying attention to the technology. At the core of digital transformation is not the technology, because if it was, technological companies, we wouldn't have any problem. And they do suffer the effects just as everybody else. At the core of the digital transformation is the business transformation, a change of mindset, a change of understanding, a change of framework, a change of operating system. So don't expect the solution to come from IT or from your technologies, because otherwise you'll be like many times with a technology in search of a problem. What we need to do is something else. And what we see too often is this. We see that we try to make random applications of the exponential technologies to the problems that we have in front of us. See, this is very unspecific, and these, sincerely, we just don't have time for this. We need to be much more intentional in our research. We need to understand what might affect us, what might disrupt us, and for that, we need to be specific of where in our business model those technologies might affect. So when we talk about disruption, when we talk about the effects of these technologies, we need to be, again, specific. This area, this certainty, this activity, this part of my business model is at risk because of this technology, because of this and that. All right. So when we do this, we're going to find a lot of great opportunities, because of course the new technologies are going to bring new solution spaces. But is that enough? I'm going to share with you an example that might be close to you. This was a typical English cloth factory from a couple of centuries ago. The entire design of the factory depended on a large steam engine upstairs, and the loom machines downstairs were connected to it with these vertical bands that you see on screen. In the 19th century, the electric motor emerged, and the management decided to replace the steam engine above with an electric one. They actually showed an immense lack of imagination. They didn't understand the real possibilities of the new technology, because they limited themselves to try to improve what they were already doing. It took them 20 years to realize that they could put small motors in each one of the machines instead of changing the big one above. And by putting a motor in each one of the machines, of course, they gain what? They gain mobility. They no longer need to have a fixed floor plan, because they could have independent machines and break the dependency of the machine above. The electric motor took mobility, brought mobility. And, why, if you can have mobility, why would you have things fixed? This is something that applies now everywhere. If you can have a very low price for mobility and for energy, why fixing things to the ground, right? See, understanding this is not that obvious. It's obvious when you see it done and proposed, but in general, it's opaque to us. Why? Because we tend to see the new through the lens of the old. We are limited by the previous comprehension, by our routines, by our existing standards and mental models that are limiting the vision of what is possible. All right. So again, let me insist on this idea. Digital transformation is not about technology. It is about really understanding its effects on our reality, on our business model, on the challenges and the opportunities that we could be developing. All right. So we were seeing how technology can change the solutions that we are proposing. See, but there is yet one more interesting level, which is understanding the new problems that technology brings. So If we focus on the solutions, we'll be at this level. If we focus on the problems, we'll be one level beyond everybody else, one level higher. See, that is what I'm going to ask you to do. Not only focus on the solution space, but go one level beyond and start focusing also on the changes in the problem space. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples to illustrate this idea. So this is Sir Patrick Doyle. He was the CEO of Domino's Pizza. He took over Domino's Pizza in 2010. And back on the days, the stock was trading just under $9 per share. So it wasn't a sweet moment. I mean, Domino's Pizza had lived an amazing growth in the past, but now they were no longer appreciated neither by clients nor by investors. So when he took over, when Mr. Patrick Doyle took over, he started like a rethinking process, and he understood that the pizza was really, really bad. I mean, it was no longer a very good pizza. So they stated that they acknowledged that the pizza was bad, and they were going to put all of their efforts to try to change that. Our pizza is terrible. We will change this. But see, he made a completely different he offered a completely different thing to everybody in the company, which is a completely different understanding of what was the job to be done. He understood that the real problem of the pizza, the real problem of Domino's was not the quality of the pizza that could be solved for. The real problem was related to the value proposition. So everybody had understood in the past that the value proposition of Domino's Pizza had to be the quality of the pizza. But then Mr. Patrick Doyle suggested, well, let's rethink the job to be done. This is Clayton Christensen suggesting that it is a focus on the job to be done, what will bring clarity about potential disruptors and potential new opportunities. So he suggested that the real problem that the new Domino's Pizza had to face was logistics delivery. He understood, and he made everybody understand that Domino's Pizza was no longer a pizza company. He was a logistics delivery company. So from that re-understanding of the problem that they were facing came a battery of new initiatives, like this pizza tracker that you see on screen. And in only 6 years, the price performance changed magnificently. Sorry, the stock evaluation changed magnificently, and it started trading in above $160 in only 6 years. So that is the change that he was able to bring. And not only that change, but a completely different understanding of the initiatives that would live in the context of Domino's Pizza. Today, just yesterday, actually, we saw in the news that Domino's Pizza was partnering with Nuro to explore this field of self-driving pizza delivery. And that only happens because they understood, they redefined the job to be done in their company. So that is an example that I like, but I even like more these other example, Racini. Racini is another company, just as yourselves, that we worked with in the past. Racini is the largest provider of suspension mechanisms and brakes for vehicles worldwide, like for Maserati or for Tesla, etc. So their concern, the basic concern, the problem to be done, to be solved, is the job to be done is to reduce the weight of the suspension components. And during the sprint, during the 5 weeks of the sprint, this is a picture of actually the disruption session. That is 5 weeks during the sprint, and this was my team. They were able to 3D print a component that was designed with new design software with generative design tools, and we were able to reduce up to 8% the weight of the component. That was massive. That was really a success. But then came the most beautiful part of this example. Then we understood that, the cars that they were serving, like the Tesla, for example, had a new technology that was bringing a completely different problem. And that problem was, of course, that the electric engines are noiseless. They don't make noise in comparison to the old engines. So now the sound that their components would make, the brakes or the suspension mechanisms, started to be relevant. They started to hear a squeaky that was no longer present. But we were able to identify the sound as a problem before anybody else. And all of the designs, they started computing the parameters that would affect the sound of the engine because they understood understood that the job to be done was no longer related to the weight, but now to the sound as well. So that is how their job to be done changed. See, this is a couple of examples to explain how technology is creating not only new solution spaces, but also new problems that our companies need to solve for. And probably Rossini was not expert in the sound before that. Well, probably not, for sure, they were not. But now they needed to face this problem if they wanted to still remain relevant. Okay, and if we go to Tesla themselves, same thing happens here. What is the problem? What is the job to be done for Tesla? Well, typically we could understand that it's the battery life, right? The energy, the battery storage, etc. But see, and that is true. I mean, that is, of course, a job to be done. But then we see a completely different job to be done with these self-driving cars, which is the insurance. I mean, who pays in case of an accident? Is it the car owner or the car maker or the typical insurance company? Who is it that's going to be responsible for the insurance of this car in case of an accident? So not only do we see a Tesla, but also we see the majority of the car companies and the truck companies operating in the fields of self-driving that are now needing to accept liability when their cars or trucks are operating in autonomous mode. So that is a company that typically belongs to an industry, which is the production of cars, self-driving cars, if you want, now having to offer value or solve problems in a completely different industry, which is the industry of the insurance, right? So maybe this very concept of the industry needs to be much more elastic, and we start following the advice of what's her name again? Tina. Can anybody help me here? She talks about arenas instead of industries. Well, never mind. I'll give you the reference because actually she's an amazing thinker, and her main
Professor Rita McGrath.
Rita McGrath. Thank you, Suman. Great to have you so ready to help here. So yeah, Rita McGrath suggests precisely that. Maybe our understanding of the very industry that we're operating on should be more flexible. Maybe we should start thinking about arenas, because we're going to find ourselves operating in completely different industries, in completely different sectors, and the boundaries that we have limited for our industry are too strict. So, one of the things that we might need to reconsider is not only the job to be done, but the very industry that we belong to. See, and that is the case for Tesla. Tesla needed to operate in not only in this battery field, but also in the insurance field. So, see, this is one of the beauties of the methodology that we're proposing you, the EXO methodology. We no longer have certainty about the problem that we need to solve. I mean, there are many problems that are still going to be relevant, but now we have a battery of new problems that we're going to need to face. All right, and that is the difference between our methodology and many others. See, I'm going to give you an example that you've probably heard of, which is the example of Kodak. Everybody has heard of this example, and everybody uses this example as an example of a company that was disrupted. So what happened with Kodak? Kodak was in the business of producing these exposure films, right? They were limited number of exposures. By the average age in at least in my team, in my age team, which is 40, I'll assume that everybody has used these rolls, these camera rolls. So you know that the problem with these rolls is that they had limited exposures, and they were expensive, and they were timely to get them back. So the problem that they were dealing with was chemical, but also dealing with the scarcity, right, of the films. And then we see these new technology that actually came from the very company, by an employee in this company, which is digitizing the product, digitizing the roll, and changing from limited exposures to infinite exposures. And that brought a massive change in the problem space. See, scarcity was the reality that they used to deal with in the past. Now they had to deal with a new problem, which is the infinity of pictures. So what do you do with all of these pictures? No longer do you have the problem of the scarcity, how expensive they are, how long they take to return them to you. Now you have an abundance of pictures that you don't know how to manage. What do you do with all of these pictures? See, and the problem is that the job to be done had changed, but Kodak didn't change the company to serve this new problem. So they had a new problem space that required new business model, but they didn't adapt. Some others did, though. While they went to bankruptcy, there was a company called Instagram that with only 13 employees was able to understand what the new problem was and was acquired later by Google. They were effective because they understood the change of the problem space. See, and that is one of the most critical things. One of the most critical frameworks that we apply at Singularity University and in this context, in the context of EXO. We need to transition from scarcity to abundance. And we need to understand that not only are technologies bringing new problems, but it's changing the problems that our companies were created for. So if that happens to us, that means that our companies are completely obsolete and we need to redesign our companies to try to respond to the new business. So the question applies for every company. What business are you in? What is your real business? What is the job to be done? And are you really updated to the new realities and to the new problems that you need to face? We need to evolve from scarcity to abundance. And this concept of abundance precisely is a perspective that will allow us to reinterpret massively all of our organization. See, this idea of abundance is bringing a new framework to understand our reality. And that is a framework that we'll need to apply to all of the assumptions that we do in our company. This little story I'm going to tell because I think it's very interesting. It's the story of actually, it's a story that is represented on the book, Abundance Book, which by Peter Diamandis. The original version of this book that we were offered actually at Singularity University was covered with aluminium foil. And it was because it's a very good example of how something that was scarce in the past became abundant. And he gave the example of the king of Siam, who was visiting the niece of Napoleon III. And actually, they were received with everybody was received with golden silverware and plates because gold and platinum were very expensive back then. But the king himself was received with aluminium silverware. Why? Because it was so scarce. It was very, very, very complicated, very expensive, the aluminium. Why? Actually, it was abundant aluminium in the crust of the earth. It's one of the 8 more frequent elements, but it wasn't very easy to extract it, to separate it from the surrounding materials and compounds until a technology, a chemical process actually came in, the electrolysis, and made these components massively abundant. And then aluminium started being from very, very scarce and very expensive to being completely abundant. See, these technology liberated an abundance. And that is the message that is conveying this book. Technologies are liberating abundance, and it's happening not only through atoms, through the physical world, but also through bits. So now the new challenges that we need to face is abundance. And that is the main effect that we need to face to understand what the future might be in our organizations. See, this is an article that suggested that to change the way you think, you need to change the way you see. And it's an article that was published in Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago. And that's exactly the point of this conversation today, or this monologue. Try to offer you new perspective, new sunglasses to reinterpret your reality. Because as we were saying, we have new exponential technologies. We have a lot of them. And they're all converging to create abundances, to liberate abundances. And those abundances will massively disrupt the business model that were created around scarcities. The majority of our models of our business in the past were created around identifying a scarcity, a product, a service, making it really scarce, and giving a control access to that scarcity. And now we see that the modes, the barriers of entry are completely falling, and the access to these technologies or to these information or to these scarcities is now abundant, infinitely abundant. So if your business is created around a scarcity, you're going to be disrupted. And disruption means that the companies that want to stay relevant need to create reactions at the business model level. This is a video, actually, I'm not going to share with you, but it's a video of people that have problems with identifying colors, right? Color blindness. And there's some glasses for these people that are marvelous. You just put them on, and then from there, you go from seeing in black and white to seeing in color. the reactions to these people are just amazing when they first use these glasses, because they see completely different colors. They see a new reality. See, that is the new reality that we need to look through. It's the reality of abundance. And this effect of abundance it's not minor. I mean, in the past, with exponential technologies, with the internet, we were able to make a huge change on the cost of demand. When you're running a company, you're worried about the demand and the supply, the relative cost of both of them, right? So with internet, we were able to lower the price of demand. We were able to lower the price because we have new channels to access new markets and new customers. So the marginal cost of the demand could drop to zero if you were if you were successful enough using memes and so on in internet. But now what we see happen is that the marginal cost of the supply is going to zero. The marginal cost of the supply is lowering massively. We see these exponential companies, exponential organizations that are precisely using this new paradigm, this new change, right? They are leveraging the existing abundance. And this is an example you've probably already seen, but I love it. This is Brian Chesky suggesting Marriott, our competitor, wants to add 30,000 rooms in 2014, and we will do that in the next 2 weeks. See, that is the effect of the exponential technologies. That is the effect of leveraging abundances. And that is exactly what we want to start considering during the EXO sprint. What are the abundances? What are the scarcities that our companies build around? And what are the abundances that we could be leveraging? Right? Because we see that the successful exponential organizations are precisely doing this. These are some examples like Uber that owns no vehicle, Facebook that has no content, Alibaba has no inventory, etc. See, this is the new the operating system and the new approach to growth. In the past, when we thought about growth, we also think necessarily about scaling or about merging and acquisitions. And now there is a new approach, which is about leveraging these abundances. So that is the perspective that we need to apply during the sprint. And see, I have here represented the perspective with a glass symbol, but also the 8 and the infinity, if you want to see it too. Why? Because we are talking about the perspective of the infinity, and you will need to be exposed to this at least 8 times, following Business Harvard Review advice, for it to start making a dent on your reality. I mean, because we are not. See, these frameworks are just so different. They go against everything that we took for granted in the past. They are require from us a completely a new approach, a different perspective. And precisely, it is the perspective shift that is what is going to unlock many more powerful resources than anything else can do. This is not about budget. This is not about hard work. This is about perspective. So we want you to start working from that perspective. Because see, once you acquire that perspective, it's going to be very, very difficult to forget about it. I don't know if in screen some of you might see there's an animal in the middle of the screen. There's like actually it's a dog, and it's hard to see. I mean, it took me a while to see. It's a Dalmatian dog, and it's looking towards the right upper right of the image. I assume some of them have seen it already, some others might not. But when you see it, it's going to be very difficult to unsee it. See, that is the beauty of it. And now, when you understand really the effects of these exponential change and these abundances, it's going to be very difficult for you to stop considering this in your initiatives, in your projects, etc. So the next logical question that I'll ask you is, again, what are the scarcities that your business model is built around, and what are the abundances that you could leverage? Because that is going to change everything in your organization. See, it's going to change. We've seen how it changes the problem space potentially. We've seen how it changes necessarily the value proposition, but it's actually going to require from you to reassess all of the assumptions that you have in your organization. Not only the problem, not only the solution. And as I was saying, we already reviewed the problem space, but we need to go through all of these I told you maybe this concept of the industry that we are so accustomed to is limited. Maybe we need to change it for the arena to be able to jump from one to another to adjacent sectors and to foresee where disruption might come from. Maybe the very business that we are creating needs to be reinterpreted. The challenges now, I told you that maybe one of the challenges is the exponential change of rate. Another challenge is the abundance. But the very purpose of the organization, now we see that the organizations are becoming movements, and people, to belong to movement, they want a purpose. So maybe the purpose is now at the core of the belonging, at the core of the community, at the core of the users, and also the employees of the organization. Maybe creating a positive impact on society needs to redefine the purpose of the organization. The solution space is going to change, the value creation is going to change, the relationship with customers is going to change, with stakeholders going to change. Everything, your modes, your competitive advantages are probably needing to be reassessed. So see, all of that is typically represented on a business model canvas. And now what we are suggesting, and there I will insist, I suppose, on these more during the next masterclass, is to turn all of these assumptions, these certainties that we inherited from the past, and review them and I turn them into hypotheses that will need to be retested. Why? Because disruption, I don't know exactly where disruption will come from, but I know exactly where it will affect you. It will affect you on your certainties. So see, if you want to disrupt someone, you need to challenge their assumptions. There's this quote that I very much like from a Spanish thinker, Jorge Wagensberg, that recently died. He said, changing the answer is evolutionary. Changing the question is revolutionary. And I added to that, changing the assumption is where disruption happens. But see, changing the assumption is not easy. It's not just like you're going to navigate a new landscape and you just download a new map. See, that's not how it works. We need a completely different mental model. And for that, we need to let go of the previous one, because change is like a trapeze, right? You need to forget about that. And it's, believe me, very, very hard. See, we are asking to think without all of the prejudice and all of the routines and all of the valuable knowledge that you were applying, a valuable wisdom that you were applying in the past, and change it for a new framework. That intentional thinking is very, very hard. This is how a kid draws, like a drawing of a kid. And this is a Spanish famous painter, Miró, that the majority of the people dislike, because when they go to the museum and say that, they say, well, my kid paints just like that. I mean, there's no purpose on doing this easy until you start trying yourself. Because forgetting all of the routines, forgetting all of the processes, all of the techniques that you have inherited as a painter, as a very established and recognized painter, and try to go back to the origin, go back to the root, and to think like a child does, is very, very, very difficult. Currently, we have a master's on learning, MBA, and so on. And my suggestion is that we should create masters of unlearning, because it's probably one of the most difficult things to do. So why is that? Well, because we're going to be filled with automatisms, with intuitions that are there for a reason. I mean, they need to be there in our brain to protect ourselves, or in our companies to protect our companies, to grant the efficiency, right? And the protection of what is currently paying the bills. But at the same time, we need a different operating system in our brains to challenge all of that. And we need to overcome our individual resistances, our personal immune system, and also the immune system of the companies. And believe me, there is a lot of that, because people are not hired to challenge the status quo. They are challenged. We are all hired to protect the status quo. So it goes against the very purpose of our work. It's like unintuitive. Plus, we don't have an image of the future that we have to build. We have a massive lack of imagination. See, we know that everybody's falling around us, but we don't understand that that could happen to us. Or even we don't understand that we could become the disruptors for our own industry or for third parties industries. So that lack of imagination, I would say, is a problem that we're going to be facing. And hopefully by the next week, the next 2 weeks, we'll be almost there with a generation of scenarios, future scenarios that will sparkle that imagination. So this is what the exponential frameworks is bringing, the exponential organization is bringing. Not only new problems, new understanding of the problems that we have, understanding of the exponential technology and the impact that it might have, understanding of the concept of abundance, and how did these concepts and these frameworks came to be? Well, by observing the companies that were doing really, really well, by observing the companies that were having 10x results, 10x outputs in comparison to the others. So in a way, this little book is having a massive impact on the wall of our reality. This sculpture by an artist that suggests very eloquently that just a very book can create a massive impact on the whole wall. So I believe the book that articulated our methodology is precisely that one, right? The one that will change our understanding. It will describe, it is going to help us face unknown problems, determine them, imagine them. It's going to help us leverage the exponential technologies at an exponential rate of change, leverage the abundances, and deal with the immune system. See, that is the beauty of what we are doing. Because abundances will bring disruptions. Disruptions need a reaction from a business model. We need to ask ourselves the question, what is the business model of abundance? And how can we leverage those abundances? And for that, we're going to be offered with not only the prism of the exponential change, not only the prism of abundance, but a myriad of 11 different prisms, which are the exponential attributes that will help us reinterpret, reimagine massively our organization. That can be the core of the organization or the edge, the initiative that we are going to create at the edge, to create provocative scenarios. Again, what would our company would be if we took the interface attribute or the autonomy attribute to the extreme, if we made a radical application of these attributes. See, those attributes will become prisms that will allow us to reinterpret our reality. So this is a oversimplification, which I very much enjoy, of the ideas attributes that allow us to manage abundance, and the scale attributes that allow us to access abundance. So the interfaces will bring connection, the dashboards will bring clarity, the experiments will accelerate our learning. And see, in the past, it was all about accelerating efficiency. Now it's all about accelerating learning and agility, right? Autonomy will give ownership and resilience to the teams, and the social will allow us to collaborate at scale, to leverage the collective intelligence, the abundance of intelligence, plus the collective intelligence of our ecosystem. On the scale side, we have the staff on demand that will allow us to interface with the talent worldwide. The community will give us momentum. There's many of the functionalities that typically we did internally in organizations that now can be brought to at a community level. So that is going to give you a lot of momentum. The algorithms is going to allow you to interface with the abundance of data out there and to extract the value of those abundances. We're going to gain massive flexibility by leveraging assets. Right, we're going to allow us to grow without having to buy, without having to scale, without having to merge with other companies, and the engagement is going to bring the abundance of participation. We're going to give incentives to the participation to access and to retain those abundances. So each one of these attributes is going to help us through the process of connecting to abundances, to accessing abundances, and to reinterpret our realities, all of the assumptions that we have made in the past through the lens of abundance. Because that is the purpose of the sprint. Leverage abundance to change the company, to change what you're doing at the company, and to change what your company can become in the future. So this is what I had prepared for you. I just want to insist on this idea that the biggest asset that you're going to have individually and collectively is going to be your mindset. And I want to thank you for your attention and maybe open it for a little interaction or conversations with you.
And it will lead you to the light. The apple on the top of the tree is never too high to achieve. So take an example from Eve. Experiment. Be curious. Though interfering friends may frown, get furious at each attempt to hold you down. If this advice you only employ, the future can offer you infinite joy and